The sun blazed across the desert horizon, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson. A veteran Navy SEAL named Jack Rains, hardened by years of war, loss, and precision, stood beside a group of young recruits at a private shooting range. He'd seen everything in his years of combat: snipers who could hit a target a mile away, explosions that rattled his bones, and friends who never came back. Nothing surprised him anymore until that day. If you believe in honor, courage, and second chances, hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel for more stories that remind us what humanity still stands for. Leave a comment below. Tell us what legacy means to you. Your words might be the echo that inspires someone else. A quiet stranger arrived, a man in his 30s, dressed simply, carrying a large black case. No military posture, no insignia, no arrogance, just calm eyes and silent confidence. When he unzipped that case, the metallic gleam of a Barrett .50 caliber sniper rifle caught the sunlight. Jack's lips twitched into a smirk. "That's one hell of a rifle," he said, half amused. "Where'd you get that, son?" The man looked up, his voice steady but heavy with memory. "It's not where I got it, sir. It's who gave it to me." And when he took that first shot, a single thunderous crack that split the silence, even the veteran SEAL froze, because what that man hit and what he revealed afterward would change everything Jack thought he knew about skill, service, and sacrifice. The Arizona desert stretched endlessly under the brutal afternoon sun, its heat waves distorting the horizon into a trembling blur. The air was dry, the wind sharp with sand, and every sound, every breath, every distant echo seemed magnified in the open vastness. At the heart of that desert stood an isolated military-style shooting range surrounded by dunes and scattered brush. Targets shimmered in the distance, steel plates glinting like tiny mirrors beneath the sun's unforgiving glare. Behind the shooting line, a group of young men adjusted their gear, nervous laughter breaking through the heavy silence. They were here for one reason: to learn from Jack Rains, a man whose name carried weight far beyond the range. Jack was a legend among soldiers, a retired Navy SEAL sniper, once called Deadeye Rains for his unshakable precision. He had spent decades in the field, deserts, jungles, mountains, places where one wrong breath could end your life. Now, in his late 40s, Jack carried himself with quiet authority. His frame was still lean and powerful, his eyes sharp but tired. The eyes of a man who had seen too much, yet never forgot any of it. Deep lines carved across his face, each one a story of survival, loss, and loyalty. He stood beside the line of recruits, his weathered hands resting on his waist, a faint smell of gunpowder clinging to his faded combat jacket. "All right, listen up," Jack barked, voice steady and commanding. "You think shooting is about hitting targets? Wrong. It's about control. Your breath, your nerves, your mind. Miss because of your fear, you're already dead." The recruits nodded, some intimidated, others excited. They had all heard the stories, how Jack could split a playing card at 800 yards, how he had neutralized threats no one else could see. He wasn't a man you questioned, he was a man you learned from. As he paced down the line, his boots crunching against gravel, Jack paused behind one of the younger shooters, struggling to steady his rifle. He adjusted the man's shoulder position, his tone low but firm. "You're not fighting the gun," he said. "You're fighting yourself. Learn to breathe. The bullet goes where your calm does." The recruit nodded nervously, following his instruction. The shot rang out. Clang! A clean hit on steel. The others clapped quietly. Jack gave a faint approving nod, but as the sound faded, a distant hum caught everyone's attention. The slow approach of a truck rolling down the dusty path toward the range. The group turned as the vehicle came into view, kicking up a trail of dust behind it. Jack squinted, pulling off his sunglasses. Visitors were rare. He hadn't invited anyone new today. The truck came to a stop a few yards away. The door opened and out stepped a man, mid-30s, wearing faded jeans, a plain gray shirt, and a black cap pulled low. He moved with calm precision, not hurried but deliberate, every step purposeful. No military haircut, no badges, no recognizable stance. Just a quiet, steady confidence. He carried a long, heavy black rifle case. The recruits exchanged curious glances, whispering among themselves. "Who's that?" "Maybe a journalist." "He's carrying something big." Jack's eyes narrowed. Something about the man's demeanor felt familiar, controlled, experienced, not your average civilian. The stranger stopped at the range line and set down the case gently on the bench. Dust clung to his boots, but his movements were smooth, practiced. He nodded politely toward Jack. "Afternoon, sir. I heard this was the best place to test long-range precision." Jack crossed his arms, measuring him. "Depends on who's asking. This isn't a playground. You know how to handle a rifle." The man's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "I've had some practice." Something about the answer made Jack's instincts stir. He'd spent years reading people, soldiers, enemies, men under pressure. The stranger's calmness wasn't arrogance, it was experience. "You got a name?" Jack asked, voice even. "Ethan," the man said simply. "Ethan Cole." Jack nodded slowly. "All right, Ethan. Let's see what kind of practice you've had." Ethan knelt beside the bench and unzipped the black case. The metallic glint of a Barrett M82A1 50 caliber sniper rifle reflected under the desert sun. Sleek, powerful, unmistakable. The kind of weapon that could pierce armor and end a life from over a mile away. Every recruit fell silent. Even Jack took a slow breath, his voice dropping a note. "That's one hell of a rifle." Ethan's hand lingered on the weapon, reverent, almost as if it were more than metal and engineering, as if it carried memory. Jack tilted his head, curious now. "Where'd you get that Barrett 50? Ethan finally looked up, his calm eyes meeting Jack's. "It's not where I got it," he said quietly. "It's who gave it to me." A long silence followed. The desert wind picked up, swirling sand around their boots, whispering across the open range like a ghost from the past. Jack's instincts sharpened. He didn't know it yet, but that moment, that single exchange, would lead him into one of the most humbling days of his life. Because by the time the sun set over that desert, the man standing before him would challenge everything Jack Rains believed about skill, service, and legacy. The desert wind howled faintly, carrying grains of sand that glittered in the fading sunlight. The tension in the air was almost physical as Ethan Cole knelt beside the shooting bench. Every motion he made was deliberate, calm, efficient, precise. He didn't rush, didn't speak, didn't glance around for approval. The other men shifted uneasily, their confidence fading into curiosity, even discomfort. This wasn't a man playing soldier. Jack Rains, standing a few feet away with his arms folded, watched closely. Years of combat had trained him to spot the smallest details, the way someone's hand steadied a weapon, the weight in their step, the control in their breathing. Ethan didn't move like a hobbyist or an amateur. He moved like someone who knew the cost of mistakes. The young recruits whispered among themselves, "That's a Barrett, right? What's he doing with that? You can't even buy one of those without clearance. Maybe he's ex-military." Jack silenced them with a glance. The only sound was the click of Ethan's hands assembling the rifle. He slid the .50 caliber magazine into the chamber, checked the scope alignment, then adjusted the bipod. His fingers moved with mechanical grace, the kind of muscle memory that only came from years of repetition. Jack couldn't help but step closer, curiosity slowly replacing skepticism. "You trained somewhere before?" he asked casually, testing him. Ethan didn't look up. "Somewhere," he replied simply, tightening the scope. "Military?" Jack pressed. Ethan paused, then exhaled softly. "Not exactly." The vagueness unsettled Jack more than an answer ever could. The man wasn't being arrogant. He was being cautious, guarded. Whatever his story was, it wasn't one he shared lightly. Jack decided to probe further, adopting a rougher tone. "You come out here with a gun like that, you better know how to use it. Otherwise, you're wasting my time." Ethan's expression didn't change. He nodded once, calm as ever. "Then I'll make sure your time isn't wasted, sir." The quiet authority in that voice caught Jack off guard. He'd commanded soldiers, officers, and specialists, but this was something different. There was no defiance in Ethan's tone, no bravado, just certainty. Jack grunted. "All right then, Cole. Target's out at 1,600 yards. You hit that steel plate, I'll give you my respect. You miss, you pack up and leave. Deal?" Ethan's lips lifted slightly. Not a smile, but something close. "Deal." The recruits snickered under their breath. None of them had ever hit that plate. It was a mile away, barely visible even through a scope. The wind alone made the shot nearly impossible. Ethan adjusted the Barrett, the heavy rifle glinting under the harsh sun. He lay prone on the mat, positioning himself with quiet precision. Every breath, every movement was methodical. He didn't fidget, didn't hesitate. He lined up the target through the scope, his finger hovering over the trigger guard. "You ready, rookie?" one of the recruits called out mockingly. Ethan didn't respond. Jack raised a hand to silence them. There was something in Ethan's stillness, a kind of focus that Jack hadn't seen in years. It wasn't the nervous concentration of a new shooter. It was the calm of someone who had stared through a scope under fire. Jack leaned slightly forward, his voice low but firm. "Remember what I said. It's not the gun. It's the man behind it." Ethan whispered, almost to himself, "I know." Then the air trembled. Boom! The sound of the Barrett split the desert open, a thunderous, soul-shaking roar that echoed for miles. The recoil jolted the dust from the mat, but Ethan didn't flinch. He stayed still, eyes locked through the scope. The entire group held their breath, waiting for the sound, the faint metallic clang that signaled a hit. It came. Ping. A single, clean strike echoed from the distance. The men turned to one another, wide-eyed. Nobody spoke. Jack blinked once, processing what he'd just heard. Then he frowned, trying to keep his composure. Maybe it was luck. Maybe the wind shifted. Nobody nails that kind of shot on the first try. Not in these conditions. He stepped closer, voice gruff. "Do it again." Ethan didn't say a word. He adjusted his scope, half a click, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger again. Boom. Ping. Dead center. Again. This time, even the recruits stopped pretending to be unimpressed. One of them whispered, "No way." Jack felt a strange mix of disbelief and curiosity tightening in his chest. He'd seen expert snipers miss those shots in ideal conditions, but this man, this quiet stranger, was hitting steel from a mile out in the wind like it was second nature. "Who are you?" Jack muttered under his breath. Ethan lowered the rifle slowly, resting it gently on the mat. His face remained calm. No pride, no excitement, just quiet respect for the weapon in his hands. He looked up at Jack, eyes unreadable. "Just someone finishing what his father started." That line landed like a shot of its own, cold, heavy, and final. Jack's brows furrowed. Something in his gut told him this wasn't just about target practice. There was a story buried behind that Barrett, one soaked in history, duty, and maybe even loss. And Jack Rains, the veteran who thought he had seen it all, was about to learn that some battles never end. They just pass from one generation to the next. Even the wind seemed to still as Ethan Cole lay prone on the coarse mat, his cheek pressed against the cold steel of the Barrett's stock. Time itself seemed to stretch, long, thin, and heavy, before that moment. The recruits behind him shifted, their earlier arrogance gone. Their faces were tight with anticipation, eyes squinting toward the horizon where the steel target stood, a dull silver glint more than a mile away. Jack Rains stood a few paces behind, arms crossed, his shadow cutting across the dust. He'd seen thousands of shooters take their stance, soldiers, mercenaries, even Olympic marksmen, but there was something hauntingly familiar about the way Ethan breathed. Inhale, hold, exhale, slow, controlled. No tension in his shoulders, no tremor in his fingers. Jack found himself whispering almost unconsciously. He's not aiming, he's aligning. Ethan adjusted the scope by a single click. The sun glared hard across the dunes, the mirage dancing like a living thing between him and the target. The air shimmered, distorting everything. But Ethan didn't blink. He steadied his breath, feeling the heartbeat in his trigger finger slow. Slow, until there was nothing. Only stillness. And then, boom! The rifle roared like thunder. The desert shook. A storm of dust exploded around him, rolling outward like a shockwave. The sound echoed off the barren hills, rumbling through the air long after the shot had gone. Jack instinctively glanced at the far target through his own binoculars. The blast had been deafening, but what he saw next made his throat tighten. The steel plate, the same one even expert shooters had trouble nicking on calm days, now had a perfect hole dead center, the sunlight flashing through it like a tiny beacon. The range fell silent. Not a murmur, not a breath. For a full 10 seconds, all that existed was the echo of that impossible shot. Then one of the younger recruits broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. "No way! That was a lucky shot, right?" Jack didn't answer. He kept the binoculars up, his heartbeat quickening. His veteran-S instinct told him what his pride didn't want to admit. That wasn't T-luck. That was mastery. Still, he needed to be sure. He lowered the binoculars slowly and called out, his voice steady but cold. "Do it again." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't even glance at Jack. He just adjusted the scope again. A subtle shift, maybe a single millimeter, and chambered the next round. Jack folded his arms, feigning indifference, though his stomach tightened. "Come on, son. Prove me wrong." Ethan took another breath. Calm, steady, the same rhythm. The trigger moved. Boom. This time, the plate didn't just ring, it sang. A clean, sharp clang cut through the desert air, followed by a perfect puff of dust kicked up from the center. 2 shots, 2 impossible bullseyes. The recruits started murmuring again, disbelief spreading like wildfire. "No one does that. That's military-grade precision. Who the hell is this guy?" Jack felt a strange sensation creeping up his spine, a mix of admiration and unease. His trained eye had noticed something the others hadn't, the way Ethan compensated for the crosswind, how he read the heat shimmer in the distance, how he factored it all without even looking at instruments. That wasn't instinct, that was training. Elite, specialized training. Jack's jaw tightened. He took a step forward, his boots crunching against the dry gravel. "You've done this before," he said, voice low but sharp. Ethan lifted his head slightly, his eyes still hidden beneath the brim of his cap. "Maybe once or twice." The tone wasn't smug. It was modest, but it only deepened the mystery. Jack knelt down beside him, lowering his own voice. "No civilian shoots like that, not even close. You want to tell me what unit trained you?" Ethan slowly turned his head toward him. For the first time, Jack saw his eyes, calm, dark, and heavy with memories that didn't belong to a civilian. Eyes that had seen chaos, loss, discipline. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you," Ethan said softly. "Try me," Jack pressed. Ethan hesitated, then gave a faint, distant smile. The kind that came from remembering something painful but precious. "My father taught me. He used to train people like you." Jack froze. For a second, he thought he'd misheard. "People like me?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded once, setting the rifle down carefully, his hand brushing over the Barrett's cold barrel with reverence. He said, "Precision isn't about hitting the target. It's about understanding why you're aiming at it." Those words hit Jack like a memory he hadn't wanted to face. They were familiar. Too familiar. The kind of words only a few men ever said. Jack took a slow step back, a chill running down his spine despite the desert heat. There was something stirring deep in his mind, a name, a face, a voice from years ago. The crowd of recruits stood in stunned silence, still processing what they'd just witnessed. But Jack wasn't looking at the target anymore. He was looking at Ethan Cole like he'd just seen a ghost, because deep down, in some corner of his soldier's memory, he already knew what came next. That rifle wasn't just a weapon, it was a relic of a fallen brother in arms, and the man holding it wasn't just another shooter. He was carrying the legacy of someone Jack had once sworn to protect, and failed. The sun had begun to dip low in the desert sky, bleeding shades of amber and scarlet across the horizon. The wind had quieted, and a strange stillness hung in the air, as though the very earth knew that something sacred was about to surface. Ethan stood slowly, brushing the dust off his jeans. The heavy Barrett rifle remained on the mat, gleaming faintly under the dying light. The recruits still whispered in the background, but their voices were now hushed, reverent, unsure if they'd just witnessed skill or something closer to art. Jack Rains, however, didn't move. He stood there, staring at the rifle, his mind whirring through fragments of memory. The words Ethan had spoken, "My father taught me," kept echoing in his ears like an old familiar song. He took a slow step forward, eyes never leaving the Barrett. His voice, when it came, was low and rough. "You said your father trained people like me. What did you mean by that?" Ethan looked up. There was no hesitation in his eyes now, just quiet truth. He was in the service. Navy SEALs. He trained as a sniper, same unit as you, years back. Jack's pulse quickened. The wind picked up again, swirling dust around their boots. "You're telling me your father was a SEAL?" Ethan nodded once. "Not just any SEAL. He served in Team 6, Afghanistan, 2005 to 2011. Jack's chest tightened. That timeline, those years, those battles. He had served then too, and there weren't many snipers during those operations. A single name flashed in his mind, heavy as thunder. He whispered it, as if saying it might make it real. "Mason. Mason Cole?" Ethan's expression softened, his eyes glistening with the faintest shimmer of pain. "Yes, sir. Mason Cole was my father." Jack took a sharp step back. The sound of the desert seemed to fade away completely. All he could hear was his own heartbeat. He hadn't heard that name in over a decade, and yet it had never left him. Mason Cole, his spotter, his partner, his brother in arms, the man who had saved his life in Kandahar and never made it home. Jack swallowed hard, his voice breaking for the first time. I thought he died alone out there." Ethan looked down, his voice low but steady. "He didn't. He made sure someone else didn't die with him." Those words hit Jack like a bullet to the chest. His throat tightened as memories came flooding back. The chaos of that final mission, the radio static, the ambush. Mason's voice shouting through the comms, "I've got your 6, Jack. Get out of here." Jack had escaped the blast that day. Mason hadn't. And now, standing before him was Mason Essie's son, the boy who had inherited not only his father Essie's skill, but also his spirit. Jack's voice trembled. I remember that rifle. Mason carried it every day, the Barrett. He said it felt like an extension of his soul." Ethan's hand rested gently on the rifle's barrel. "He told me the same thing. Before his last mission, he mailed this rifle home with a note. Said if anything happened to him, I should keep it safe. And that one day, I'd meet a man named Jack Rains, who would teach me what he couldn't to finish." Jack's breath caught. His vision blurred for a moment as tears formed in the corners of his eyes. "He sent it to you, knowing he wouldn't come back," Jack murmured. Ethan nodded. "He told me you'd understand. That precision isn't T about hitting the target. It's about knowing why you're re-aiming at it. I didn't understand what he meant until today." Jack's head dropped. He turned away, running a hand over his face, struggling to keep his composure. The hardened soldier inside him warred with the guilt that had haunted him for years. "He saved me," Jack whispered. "He was supposed to take the evac with me, but he stayed behind to cover our retreat. I've carried that with me every single day." Ethan's voice softened, carrying the quiet calm of a man who'd made peace with pain. "He said he wouldn't change a thing. He said you were worth saving." Those words broke something inside Jack. His shoulders sagged as he exhaled a long, shuddering breath. For years, he had believed that Mason's death was his fault, that his partner's sacrifice was a debt he could never repay. And now, standing face to face with Mason's son, he felt the crushing weight of that guilt finally lift, replaced by something pure and humbling. He turned to Ethan, his voice low and unsteady. "You have his eyes, same calm before the shot, same patience. I see him in you." Ethan gave a faint smile, though his eyes were wet. "I see him too, every time I pull the trigger." Jack stepped closer and reached out, placing a hand gently on the Barrett S frame. The same weapon that had once saved his life, the same weapon Mason had used in his final moments. "This rifle's seen more courage than most men ever will," Jack said softly, "and now so have you." For a long time, neither man spoke. The desert stretched quiet and wide around them, the last rays of sunlight painting their silhouettes in gold. 2 generations of soldiers, one seasoned by war, the other shaped by loss, stood united in silence, not as teacher and student anymore, but as brothers bound by legacy. Finally, Jack straightened, his voice steady once again, though gentler than before. "You came here to learn how to shoot, but I think your father already taught you everything that matters." Ethan looked up, the sunset glinting off his eyes. "Maybe, but he wanted me to meet you for a reason." Jack nodded slowly, emotion thick in his voice. "Yeah, maybe he wanted you to remind me what real precision means." The 2 men exchanged a long, silent look, one of respect, grief, and understanding that words could never capture. In that moment, the desert no longer felt empty. It felt full of memory, meaning, and the unspoken promise that Mason Cole's sacrifice had not been in vain. The desert sun sank lower, painting the sky in deep orange and red, like fire melting into dust. Long shadows stretched across the range, and for the first time that day, the air felt cool. The world seemed to slow down, as if time itself was giving the 2 men a moment untouched by noise or history. Ethan Cole stood quietly beside his father's rifle, the Barrett M82A1, the weapon that had crossed generations, once wielded by a soldier, now in the hands of his son. Jack Rains stood opposite him, the setting sun outlining his weathered face in soft light. Neither spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The silence between them was sacred, filled with everything that didn't need to be said. Finally, Jack took a deep breath, his voice steady but lined with emotion. "You know, there's something your father used to say before every mission." Ethan looked up. "What's that?" Jack's eyes softened with memory. He'd say, "Don't aim for the enemy, aim for the future." I never really understood it back then. I was all about survival, all about the next target, the next win. But Mason, he was different. He always aimed for something bigger. Ethan smiled faintly, recognizing the words. "He said that to me too when I was a kid. I thought it was just one of his army sayings." Jack chuckled quietly, then his expression grew solemn again. He stepped forward, resting a hand on the rifle. "Your father was the best man I ever served with. He didn't just save my life. He gave me a reason to keep living after I left the field, but I never got to thank him until now." Ethan blinked, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe him anything, sir. You were his brother." Jack shook his head slowly. "That's just it. Brothers never stop owing each other." He stepped back, straightening his posture, and then, in a quiet, respectful motion, Jack removed his cap and bowed his head. The recruits, standing off in silence, watched as the grizzled veteran of countless missions paid tribute not to a soldier, but to a memory, to the man who had given his life so others could go home. When Jack lifted his head again, his eyes were glassy but resolute. "Your father's gone, son, but everything he stood for, his discipline, his courage, his heart, it's still here." He pointed to the rifle. "And it's in you." Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight. "I don't know if I can live up to him." Jack smiled softly, not his usual stern smirk, but something warm, paternal. "You already have. That shot you took today, that wasn't about accuracy. It was about peace. You weren't proving anything, you were honoring him." Ethan looked down at the Barrett, his reflection faint in the polished steel. His fingers brushed across its engraved serial plate, worn with time and sweat. He whispered quietly, as though to his father, "I hope you saw that, Dad." Jack's voice broke the silence again, firm but gentle. "You know, there's a lesson we all forget after the war ends." Ethan glanced up. "What's that?" "That legacy isn't built on medals or missions. It's built on how we carry the memory of those who gave everything. Mason's story doesn't end with a gunfight. It ends with you standing here, calm, steady, knowing who you are." Ethan's jaw trembled, emotion threatening to break through his composure. "He used to tell me stories about you, you know. Said you were stubborn, fearless, but had a good heart underneath all the grit." Jack let out a quiet laugh through his tears. He wasn't wrong. Then, without a word, Jack reached down and picked up a small patch from his vest pocket, the faded Team 6 insignia, the same one Mason Cole had worn into his final mission. He looked at it for a long moment, the fabric frayed, the edges burned, before holding it out to Ethan. "This belonged to your father," Jack said softly. "I recovered it from the field that night. I've carried it with me ever since. I think it's time it went home." Ethan hesitated, staring at the patch as though it were holy. When he took it, his hands trembled. He held it to his chest, his voice breaking for the first time. "Thank you for bringing him back to me." Jack nodded, his own throat tight. "He never left, son. He's been right here, every breath, every pull of the trigger, and now it's your turn to carry him forward." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The sun sank lower, bathing the desert in golden fire. Then Jack pointed toward the distant horizon, where the steel targets shimmered in the heat haze. "One more shot," he said softly, "for Mason." Ethan wiped his eyes, steadied his breath, and took his position. The Barrett gleamed under the fading light, the same weapon that had connected father, son, and comrade across time. He looked through the scope, not at the target, but beyond it, at the open, endless horizon that symbolized everything his father had believed in. Jack stood behind him, his hand resting gently on Ethan's shoulder. "Take it slow. Feel the wind. Remember who taught you." Ethan inhaled deeply, his heartbeat slowed. Boom! The shot tore through the silence, echoing across the dunes like thunder. Dust rose, sunlight flared, and a second later, ping, a perfect, centered hit. The sound carried across the range, crisp and clear, a single note of completion. Jack smiled faintly, a tear sliding down his cheek. "You did it, Mason," he whispered under his breath. "Your boys got your aim." As the echo faded, the recruits stood in silent awe, watching a new kind of lesson unfold before them. Not about war or weaponry, but about honor, memory, and peace. Ethan lowered the rifle gently, his expression calm and fulfilled. He turned to Jack. "What happens now?" Jack looked at the horizon, the light almost gone, and then back at him with a small, proud smile. "Now, son, you teach others what your father taught us." The camera would fade out here, two silhouettes standing side by side against a burning sunset. The mentor and the son of his fallen brother, two men bound by duty, forgiveness, and the power of legacy. And as the wind carried the last echoes of the Barrett's roar into the desert, a single line of narration would close the story. Real precision isn't T in how steady your aim is. It's S in the heart that remembers why it pulls the trigger. The training field was quiet again. The dust had settled, and the echoes of gunfire had long faded into the horizon. Where once tension and pride had filled the air, now there was only calm, a peace that felt earned, not given. Jack Rains stood at the edge of the firing range, watching Ethan pack up the Barrett. The younger man handled the weapon with the same reverence one might show a flag. Slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial, every movement spoke of respect. Jack's weathered eyes softened as he looked on. For years, he had carried the ghosts of his past, the ones he couldn't save, the battles that never truly ended. But today, something inside him had shifted. The guilt that had once shadowed every step now felt lighter, as if Mason Cole himself had whispered, "You can let go now, brother." A faint desert breeze stirred the dust, and in that moment Jack swore he could almost hear laughter, Mason's laugh, carried faintly through the wind. He smiled quietly to himself. "You did good, Mason. You raised him right." Nearby, Ethan zipped the case closed and turned toward Jack. The evening sun cast long lines of gold across his face, painting him in light, like a soldier bathed in remembrance. "I'll be heading out tomorrow," Ethan said. "Dad's grave is back in Arlington. I think he'd like to know his rifle's still hitting center." Jack nodded, emotion catching in his throat. "Tell him I said thank you for keeping his promise." Ethan smiled faintly. And what promise was that? Jack looked at the horizon, his voice quiet but steady. "That one day I'd remember what it means to aim for something worth believing in." They stood in silence again, two generations of warriors, one finishing what the other began. As Ethan walked toward his truck, carrying the Barrett with both hands, the sun dipped fully below the horizon, leaving streaks of crimson and violet in the sky. Jack watched until the truck disappeared down the dusty road, its taillights fading like two glowing embers. For the first time in years, Jack didn't feel the weight of war pressing on him. He felt peace. Real, honest peace. He sat down on an old wooden bench near the range, the cool metal of his dog tags resting against his chest. He took them in his hand, looked at the names etched there. Jack Rains, and beside it, worn but still visible, Mason Cole. His lips curved into a faint smile. "We made it home, brother," he whispered. "Both of us." The wind picked up again, brushing gently across his face, and in the distance, a faint echo of a rifle shot seemed to ride the air, not of war, but of legacy. The camera would pan upward now, rising into the painted sky as the faint sound of Ethan's last shot echoes one final time. War doesn't end when the fighting stops. It ends when the heart finds peace. Some men carry their scars as reminders of what they lost. Others carry them as proof of what they survived. But the greatest legacy isn't written in medals or missions. It's passed down through the hands that still believe in honor, discipline, and love. Mason Cole gave his life for that belief. His son lived it, and for me, I finally learned that the truest aim isn't at a target. It's at the promise we make to those who came before us.